Our first panel session of the day is gonna follow closely from this to help us understand the attention economy, the next chapter. So the panel will discuss consumer trends, the way they impact the industry, but also new metrics and best practices that are reshaping the next chapter of advertising and marketing. And please welcome this session moderator, Ryan Martin, Global Business Marketing Program Manager at TikTok and Chair of IAB Europe's Brand Advertising Committee, who will join us on stage and introduce his own panel.
Thank you.
Over to you. You need the clicker?
I don't think so, no.
I keep it then. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. Great to meet you all. My name's Ryan, as was said, and by day I work for TikTok, and by night I lead the advertising, the brand advertising committee for the IAB Europe. So thanks very much for having us today. We're just getting mic'd up at the back, so you'll be able to hear us all. Obviously, we've got Pablo from Microsoft joining us. We've got Valentina from DoubleVerify and Andy from the Attention Council. We'll be talking about attention, which is obviously one of the new kind of metrics we talk about in the industry. So I just wanted to check that we were all are paying a bit of attention this morning. So just to kind of energize the room and maybe fill for time while we're getting mic'd up. But can I get a cheer if you're paying attention now? Good, yeah. I had fears that we were going to have about like a 40% attention, but that's good. I think the cameras around the room, we're going to be tracking at about probably maybe 70, 80%. So hopefully by the time our panelists are up on stage, we'll have that at 100%. And I think they might be ready now. So please give a warm IAB Interact welcome to Pablo, Valentina, and Andy.
You can go now.
Wonderful. Oh, there's one more chair coming. Great stuff.
Vamos a dejarlas.
I was getting in early to make sure I got one.
Got to get a chair, yeah. Right, I'll sit awkwardly over here. Perfect. Cool. Just before we get underway, I thought, I'm sure you guys know about Microsoft, and I'm sure you know about DoubleVerify, but I'd just like to ask Andy just to give a couple of sentences on what the Attention Council is, just to give a bit of context for some of his answers when we're going through the discussion.
Blimey. Thanks, Ryan. So the Attention Council was actually set up a couple of years ago, actually by a number of the practitioners in the attention measurement space. The idea behind it being quite simply to try and raise awareness and understanding around attention as a concept and how to measure it. Over the last 18 months or so, it's evolved. It's a not-for-profit organization, and we're moving it to a membership organization. And the goals are, again, still to raise awareness, but also to establish best practices around how do you measure attention. And we'll talk a bit about some of the direction of that, perhaps as we go through the panel session. Quality standards, education, making sure people understand what attention is. And I do all of that on one day a week.
Thanks very much. Right then, let's jump straight into the panel, the first panel of the day. So we'll start with you, Valentina. I guess it'd be great to start, what is attention from a media perspective, and I guess what does it mean for you at DoubleVerify?
So I think, attention has always been part of the media perspective. We are really familiar with concepts like reach or viewability. I think, attention is just an evolution of these two concepts. We have seen a lot of changes recently where we are living also on a post-GDPR and CCPA area. We also have seen the challenge of the cookie deprecation. So nowadays, what I think the advertiser needs to take in consideration is that we are living in this new area, and we need an ad needs to be not only in view, but also make an impact. DoubleVerify, what that means. So, attention is really a really complex concept. We have developed an attention metric that is based on exposure and engagement. We tracked more than 50 data points, data signals, and we also elaborate on a concept like audibility, quartile completion, share screen, real estate screen, touches. So, it's a really, really complex concept. What I think is important here, that advertiser will have, the full data set that is at impression level, but also, in a privacy-friendly way. So you have this full set of data that will make, the possibility and give the possibility to advertiser to analyze their campaigns, their ads in a privacy-friendly environment.
Okay, brilliant. And Andy, does that chime with what you guys think at the Attention Council?
No.
So
no, it doesn't. No. How many panels have you sat through recently where everybody's agreed with everything that everybody said on the panel? And I agree with a large part, obviously, of what, joking apart, I agree with a large part of what Valentina's just shared with you. But what Valentina is primarily sharing with you is a device-based approach. And you've just had a survey from Forrester showing about how humans react. And the majority of the mechanisms that are used to measure attention are based on people and people's engagement with it. And one of the regular charts I use shows actually the relationship between viewability and attention. And whilst there is a relationship, it's by no means perfect. And it's possible to get attention below the MRC threshold, so you can get attention with 1 second. And then there are many ads that are viewable, but are not viewed, and people aren't paying attention to them. So I'm disagreeing slightly with Valentina.
But Andy, you don't think that viewability is always be like we have a standard, IAB standard on viewability. So we know that that is the standard to say that is a media quality. So you have a set. You said okay, from here my ad in view, and from here means that an ad is okay.
Well, first, sorry, go ahead.
No, but it's just, if we say that, so we all are using the IAB standard for viewability, what is below usually is not even considered good and valuable.
Don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to throw away the IAB standards.
Thank goodness.
Absolutely not. What I'm trying to say is that you can go further. There is another level, as you almost described it. And all I'm saying is that layering attention over other metrics, whether they're the industry standard for viewability, whether they're television impressions or print impressions, whatever it might be, is a way of assigning a value to impressions. And as we move to a world of, in theory, cross-screen measurement, you've got the initiatives from WFA through their various different guises. A lot of impressions are suddenly going to be put on a planner's desktop, and they are then going to have to make a judgment beyond reach and frequency as to why they should invest more in those channels and those media opportunities than others.
So it sounds like there's lots of definitions are coming out, and there's still some development and evolution of taxonomies and how we measure it. But why has the notion of attention suddenly come to the fore recently? Pablo, do you have any thoughts?
What I think, and actually building on what Valentina shared earlier, I think the attention and the attention economy is something that we have been discussing for years. Now, over the last years, especially after a pandemic in our lives, we have changed quite a lot our habits. And the way I define, or we define attention, is basically having mental space and time to process a message, and eventually lead into an action. But when the consumer habits have shifted so much, I think we cannot deny the importance of understanding consumer behaviors, and on that I agree with you, Andy. Because as Forrester was explaining earlier on the research, today, if we look at remote working or a hybrid workspace, that's a reality. And that is going to change the way we are engaging with media, the way we are engaging with all the different devices that we have. But it also brings opportunities. Because the way we see it is that our personal life and our work life are merging together. And the moment that is a merge of the two worlds also brings different moments of attention. And this is why now it's more important than ever, because certainly there's a lot of input. As a matter of fact, we are impacted by more than 4,000 ads per day. And our span of attention is very limited. If you add on top of that the fact that we're changing our consumer habits, then we can understand that there's opportunities. It was, for me, a very important or interesting number that was shared on Forrester, which is 60% of the people are actually buying and doing stuff during work hours, as we are right now at home in front of our computers. So how do we get attention also in those moments? So I guess in order to understand and to kind of close this question, I think it's definitely important to stand out, specifically as there's more and more input coming to us. But at the same time, as we're changing habits, how do we understand within those new habits where the opportunities are to be able to stand out from the rest?
I understand. And Valentina, where do you think this kind of new rise of prominence has come from?
No, I think, I agree with Pablo. We have also, as we said before, the habits have changed. So we need a new way to impact people, to get their attention. Otherwise, we are overloaded. If you think also about TikTok, we have, the ads and the content, the quantity of content that are produced is amazing. So you need to have, to make sure that you have the right attention and the right message also for the audience.
Yeah. Anything to add on that?
Yes, I would say that it predates the pandemic. We've had this massive proliferation of of content and commercial exposure. Pablo's point about 4,000, I think that's at the conservative end of exposure in the US. I think it goes up to 10,000 at the extreme end. But if you look back over time in the way that media is measured, I mean, in digital, we've seen things like dwell time used. In analog media like print, we've used time spent reading. They've always sort of been proxies to try and get closer to that level of engagement and on people paying attention to the platform and to the ad. And I think it's really the advent, perhaps, and the scalability of eye cameras, if we're being brutally honest about it, that I think has driven wider use of these metrics and wider capture and use of those metrics. That's not to say, and this is quite important from my membership's point of view, that eye tracking is the only way to measure attention. Somebody mentioned audio earlier on. There are other ways. You can use different approaches. You can use neuroscience. You can use facial recognition. You've got people using galvanic skin response, measuring heart rates. These are all methodologies that are being deployed at the moment to try and capture it. And the technology, as it advances, makes it more practical and affordable as a measurement.
So I guess cynically, we shouldn't just consider attention just be a way to kind of gloss up and dress up eye tracking studies.
I would definitely say that wasn't the case. There is a lot of science that's gone into this. There's a lot of work that's been done around finding privacy safe, consumer friendly ways of capturing data.
So it feels almost that the technology that we're using to measure and track attention is constantly evolving as well. So it's almost a bit of a movable feast with where we're at and how we can define attention, because that might change in 6, 12, 18 months.
This is true. So for example, just again, it's a gaze-based methodology, but you have vendors who use glasses so for an event or an outdoor measurement, they will use glasses with cameras in order to track, again, where the eye is falling on outdoor, for example.
Okay. And so I guess how do you translate what sounds like a fairly complex concept like attention into a metric for media buying and for measurement, Valentina?
Well, as you said, it's really complex concept. So I think that he really, and it's made with a lot of variables. And I think advertisers will need, to have, they have their goals, they might be like using for brand awareness or a performance campaign. So it really depends, on each advertisers or, each individual that wants to use attention to get more insight from their campaigns. There are many, many ways, to measure attention. So we are shifting from these standard, in view to a more complex. And you can have at the moment probably what, for example, you can do with a DoubleVerify. You can measure a journey of an ad. So you can you are able to see if your ad have made an impact, where and when. So there are few things that can be used nowadays to make sure that you are measuring the attention, you're making an impact, where and when, and of course in a privacy friendly way.
And are you seeing uptake from agencies and clients to go out and buy against these metrics?
Yes,
Yeah?
we are seeing like a big shift. Yeah. Also, because as I mentioned earlier, you need to make sure that you are doing an impact. We have done like a different business case, so case studies, which have actually demonstrated that using an attention metric is bringing, depending on which one are your KPIs, but you are bringing, having a higher attention, you brings more like conversion or more like a brand awareness.
Okay, brilliant. And Pablo, so we've talked about how the pandemic's kind of changed attention and how we're kind of tracking it in different ways. From the Microsoft perspective, how do you guys see the attention economy and what kind of steps are you taking to help people kind of buy against that and put themselves in those environments?
Yeah. I guess there's two folds here. One, which is predominantly how we started the conversation, which is about tracking. How do we understand attention? Which is definitely important. But at the end of the day, if I do one step back, for me, attention is just the first step to get intention, and intention to get action, which ultimately, as brands, is what we're seeking for, right? So while defining attention and understanding attention is critical, I think there is also a critical component from an advertiser perspective on how do you create attention. And traditionally, we've been relying a lot on the creative teams. How do we create the right ads, for example? How do we create the right call to actions? How do we create the right space? So that brand can effectively call the attention, engage with the potential consumer, and eventually start that relationship. So one of the things that we're seeing with many brands that are working within our Microsoft Advertising Network is when we get to the lower funnel, which is kind of close to the purchase, I guess the attention, it's somehow not that important because you can see a clear correlation on, an engagement versus a purchase. But I guess where it becomes more and more important, this whole attention concept is when we get into the upper funnel. Because there is no direct correlation of, doing a branding campaign and then, changing your sales overnight. It might influence, but it is a muscle that you need to build. And so one of the things that we're trying to help brands across Europe is to basically understand the full funnel, because sometimes we are oversimplifying from the brand awareness to the purchase. And there's the steps in between, like consideration, for example, which attention is critical, because it's when we are forming our emotions and we are starting to, really consider that brand as a potential purchase. And so understanding what is the right message at the right time in the right channel, it's what we believe can help actually advertisers and brands succeed and hence get the attention they want from their potential prospects.
So there's 2 points that I'd like to kind of follow up on. One is around creativity, which I'll come back to. But Andy, Valentina, do you agree with the idea that kind of attention plays more in the kind of the upper funnel space, and then when you move down towards kind of performance and driving action, that's where maybe viewability starts to play more of a role, or is it not quite that clear cut?
No, I don't. Well, as we mentioned earlier, we need to consider that nowadays, with the cookie deprecation, you won't be able to use, the third-party cookies anymore. So how can you measure the journey of your users? So you need to find a new way. When we are talking about attention, we have seen that a correlation between high exposure, high engagement versus conversion, and high exposure, high engagement versus brand awareness. So I think, it's not the upper funnel, it's just, a different way to get info about your user journey.
Yeah, I'd agree with Valentina on that. I mean, if you go to the Attention Council website, you'll find around 50 case studies showing how attention's been used and how it's driving metrics at all levels of the funnel. I would also, let's just take a look at that. I mean, and the challenge for me, as somebody who's worked in media measurement for more years than I care to remember, is as more money gets spent behind attention metrics, there's a concept in media measurement called money at risk. And the higher the level of money at risk, the more money that's invested behind a particular channel, then there's a greater requirement typically for measurement against that particular variable. And I'm an advocate for attention metrics, but I don't believe we've got all the answers. I think there's still quite a lot more work that needs to be done. I'm not saying stop using it, absolutely not. All the major holding companies are using it, and in some cases are actually transacting directly against it. There are many media vendors who are also adopting it into their sales practices. But what I am saying is that we need more work around experimental design to look at exactly how does it work, back to Pablo's point, how does it work, where does it work, what are the limitations, is there a single best way to measure it? And by the way, you tell me one media measurement system that doesn't have a flaw, they all have a flaw, and they can all, by the way, be gamed, as most of the people in this room know. So, I would stress that we need to do more work in that area. I'm working quite hard lobbying with the ARF, the Advertising Research Foundation in the US, and with SIM, which is the subgroup who are based around premium video, to try and tap into funds to do more experimental work, such that we can get closer to something that ultimately could be audited in the same way that viewability can be audited.
And I guess that's the thing, as soon as we start using these kind of new technologies, people want to measure them and audit them. And I guess we're at a point where we're saying maybe we're not quite ready to be audited just yet. It's still in that experimental, so test, learn, and then we can kind of learn as an industry by sharing the results of these kind of things.
Yeah, and the key differentiation here is the difference between case studies, which are all valid, an empirical test, and experimental design, which is exactly how is it working and what are the limitations, rather than here's lots of examples of where it's working, which there aren't many examples of where it's working.
Okay. Pablo, you touched on creativity. It feels like creativity is going to become ever more important to help capture that attention. And I feel sometimes as an industry we talk a lot about data and metrics, but we miss the kind of the creativity point. From your work with Microsoft, what have you guys been seeing in terms of what works or what's effective from that standpoint for capturing attention?
Again, back to the point on the number of impacts of advertising that we get per day and our span of attention. There's very limited, actually, span of attention. And so for me, what is key for a brand is to understand how to call that attention indeed.
Yeah.
And so the role creativity plays here is how can brands differentiate or stand out by utilizing their core values in a way that actually other brands perhaps are not following yet. We saw just to put an example, a couple of years ago, specifically when the whole travel, pandemic started, everything about sustainability within travel became actually a big, big differentiation point. And those early adopters of that actually were able to even, increase their brand retention, their brand recall, just because they were building their brand on that value. Interestingly enough, on the retail side, for example, we have seen research that actually proves that building your brand and your creatives based on diversity and inclusion and how you actually really, really empower those collectives that perhaps are not well represented, that actually it's something that our consumers care about. So the point here is how brands do understand the changes that we're living in to be able to be perhaps one of the first movers to build a brand and their core values around those trends and then create advertising that actually resonates with the audience, and in fact, actually can call their attention more prominently.
It sounds so simple when you say it, but yeah, we need to see more of
definitely.
that in place, absolutely. We've talked a lot about attention, and, how we measure it and how we quantify it and how we can try and capture it. But the title of this panel is obviously about the attention economy. So, how are we kind of being able to prove that attention is driving business results for people? Are we starting to see case studies and studies that are kind of showing the impact that attention is having, Valentina?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we have done a couple of case studies, and we have seen a bit, great results based on engagement and exposure. So we have literally seen a shift between also the media buying. So when you are analyzing the data, you see that those media that are bringing high engagement exposure are actually the one that you want to buy. So that is what we have seen. And also, to your point before, Pablo, I think, it's just not about, the creative needs to make an impact. But I think, what is important to remember is that you need to have the creative that is also resonating with the context. So we are just, based on what we were discussing also before, seeing that shift from the cookie deprecation, etc. So you are making an impact, engaging, but also resonate, giving the right message at the right time in the right context.
Andy?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and just picking up on building on Pablo's point about creative. We actually ran a session online last week, the video will be up on the website by the end of the week, with a number of the sort of creative development measurement leads from the folks at Kantar, System 1, and Dynator, which I would, if you're interested in how does attention work throughout an ad, I would strongly advise you to take a look at that. I mean, more generally, in terms of case studies, we're seeing a lot of, there's a lot of case studies you'll find on the website. You'll also see lots of work, co-op work now. So, folks like Dentsu are doing co-op case studies with media vendors. And I think that's a very healthy move in terms of cooperation around this.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Collaboration, working together feels like a great word forward. Pablo, anything to add on that?
I'll add something quick, which is, when we were doing actually campaigns, etc., one of the things that we tried to do is what is the correlation, and we were discussing about the variability and how that actually correlates with conversions and exposure and all of that. I think there is also other ways to look at what is the impact of attention. One of the ad effectiveness studies that we do beyond all these metrics, which I agree 100%, is how beyond the brand recall, the increase in brand awareness, etc. How is that translating in, for example, brand searches? Do actual users that get impacted by that ad really see an uplift on searches specifically on their brand? So we're moving from a generic search, I want to satisfy that need that I have, to I want to satisfy that need that I have with this specific brand. Getting to that stage is definitely a super strong win. To your point earlier, it's easier to say than to get done, but aiming towards that as another proof point to prove how attention can drive results is definitely important. The rest I agree.
Absolutely. So I guess to kind of sum up, and I'll pause for any closing remarks in a second, but I guess the attention economy is kind of still in evolution. The definitions of attention are being worked out and ratified, but that's not to say don't use them. It's all about testing and learning. But I think the thing for me that's really come out in this is that kind of classic marketing speak of it's all about getting the right message in the right place at the right time to the right people. And I think, you hear it at a lot of these kind of events, but I think never more has it been true. And so when you're out there planning campaigns, you should be looking to attention, but not forgetting the fundamentals of marketing whilst you're doing that. Any closing thoughts from the panel?
Yes, I thought you summarised that very well, Ryan. I'll just basically put out a commercial to say, please join the Attention Council. Go and have a look at our website. If it interests you and you're interested in trying to work with us to develop something closer to a planning currency, I'm not talking about a trading currency, a planning currency, we'd love the IAB to be involved, or some of the members in this room.
Thank you. Valentina?
Just adding that the attention can be like a quite complex concept, but when you test it, you try it, you will see that and the great results, and a set of data that open up new opportunity for get like the right audience in the right time and the right context.
Pablo?
I would just say +1 to what has been said, and if there's any interest in continue this conversation later on, or even in some weeks from now in Cannes, I'll be there, so happy to actually continue the conversation.
Brilliant. Well, I think that's all we've had time for this morning. So thanks very much for listening and paying attention to us. And I'll hand back to the host. Thank you.
Thank you.